He's here.
Sorry?
He's there in the door.
He's
He's
there
there in
red
the door.
jacket on. Get my camera out. Hello.
Hello everybody, hi, welcome. Oh, what a lovely, hi, I can't quite see all of your faces, but I'm trying. Nice bunch of people here. Hey, it's Friday, thanks so much for joining us. You're hanging out with myself and Steve Hackett. Hey! So, hopefully you've all got your records. Who's listened to some of the music already today? Yeah, it's good, isn't it? Yeah, a bit more enthusiasm, it's good. Yeah. You do expect it to be good, and it exceeds our expectations. And now we're going to meet Steve. So Steve's going to come out and join us now. So a big hand for Steve Hackett. The microphone just next to you there, Steve. There you go. He's going to get mic'd up. I'm not going to be the only amplification here. I'm Jo Kendall. I'm from Prog Magazine. It just so happens I have, handily, the latest issue here. Has anyone picked this up? Yeah, it's beautiful, isn't it? And look at that. You've dressed for the occasion as well, Steve.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Looking lovely. Oh, and also check out the postcards that are in there as well, and the celebrity penguin that's there. So anyway, first of all, thank you, Steve. I bought a pen, but I don't need it. So first of all, congratulations on the new album, The Circus and the Night Whale.
Thank
Had
you.
a round of applause again.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
And also, happy birthday. It was your birthday. So
Yes.
happy birthday, Steve.
Thank you.
21 again. What did you get up to?
I wish, but it's my birthday's one day before Peter Gabriel, so we get in touch on our respective birthdays. So we're, we both had to face the fact that we were staring at the mirror and seeing a 74-year-old man looking back at you. That's the way it goes.
No, I have to say there's a painting in your attic, so you have to be honest, for sure. So, The Circus and the Night Whale, this is your 30th album, I can't believe it. Is it 30 albums?
Well, that's what they're saying. I've lost count by now, I don't know. There's a lot of albums, yeah.
There's a lot. Who's got everything? Oh yes, this is a great crowd, fantastic. And of course it's a concept album as well.
Yeah, it's driven by narrative. It's a story. It's autobiographical, but then it's also sort of fantastical as well. It goes more symbolic, metaphorical as it goes on. So I haven't actually been inside a circus swallowed by a whale ever so far, but the character in the story has. Yes.
Yeah. Anyone here relate to that? Anyone been down that road themselves, or not today? Not today. Not so far. So let's circle back. When did the inspiration for the album strike? Do you remember what happened?
Well, my wife Jo, who's here.
Jo's here.
Jo's here. Hi, Jo.
Hi, Jo.
Yeah. Now we were talking about what the next album might be, and of course rock album. It's not always a rock album. Sometimes it's an acoustic album. But this time we were thinking about what can we do this time, and we were kicking around the ideas of songs and biography and life and all of that sort of stuff. And she was the one who came up with the title. Funnily enough, I thought all the good circus titles had been had, but I thought this was a good title. And then there was the idea of if it was going to be a life journey, then the idea of it starting literally in 1950 with samples of radio from that time, what the BBC sounded like in those days long before rock and roll and deregulation and all that kind of stuff. So we kick off with something that's very authentic and a bit of a newscast and various things. But I don't want to sort of tell you the whole story, because otherwise it'll preempt that journey for you.
Oh, but we might need to reveal some details a bit later.
Sure.
I was thinking about, you and I chatted a bit, and would you actually say you're a sort of nostalgic kind of person? Because I think your music's very forward-thinking.
I don't know, I think, oh God, let me think of something entertaining to say. It was Nick Nick Klebner's who said nostalgia is not what it used to be, but on the other hand, there's the idea that all musicians are forced to be historians to some degree, and I know that's a bit boring, but I think, you know, the retro thing, we've all got to go back at some point in order to move forward, so it's just a case of where you kind of pitch your tent, what country, what time, etc. And of course London is where it all kicks off, where I was born, and it was the idea that the first track was People of the Smoke, which doesn't relate to smoking too much dope in my time. It's all about Londoners. The smoke was London, and so it was driven by that to try and do a sort of a London portrait.
Is there anyone here who grew up in London, maybe might be of a similar age to Steve, 21, who might remember those heady days? Yeah. So, well, that's the thing. You know, your journey starts in sort of in Battersea, you know, post-war. What are your memories of growing up at that time?
Between the years of 3 and 7, I grew up in Churchill Gardens, which is a housing estate that faces Battersea Power Station, which was the busiest, and well, it powered half of London, and it was the biggest building in Europe. And these days, you can take a journey. Some of you may have done this up in the chimney. Has anyone done that? Yeah, you've done it. Everyone here has done it already. Okay.
All in the same lift at the same time.
Absolutely,
That was mad.
yeah, get you all in. But I remember, you know, going up in that and thinking, I'm looking back 70 years at when I was a kid, looking at this thing from the other side. From Sullivan House, which was one of the first blocks.
It was very different back then. Didn't look as nice as it does now.
It was very different, and London was very polluted, and those 4 smokestacks were very, very busy. It was a real cloud factory. So, yeah, you know, I had lots of coughs and colds and stuff as a kid as a result of that. But of course, it was to be made much more famous by Pink Floyd with their Flying Pig all those years later.
It's even mentioned in a little bit of Hawkwind as well. There's Hawkwind reference. And one of the bars is where the I can't remember the name of the album, but it's the Hawkwind cover is now a bar. They even dress in lab coats to kind of
yeah.
to evoke that.
Well, it's an amazing building. If you haven't been there, now you're allowed in, and shops, restaurants, and all the rest, and that amazing journey up inside the chimney to get that view from the top is extraordinary. I think you get about 30 people in about a time, I think.
Yeah, we're going to have to split the room up to make sure we get them up the chimneys. So, you know, you grew up in, well, you spent your teenage years in London as well, and maybe even around this area in the West End, Denmark Street.
I've got a little story. When I first left school, I didn't want to go on the dole. I had jobs, I had 5 years of jobs before Genesis, and at one point I walked the whole length of Oxford Street to go in every employment agency there was, and that took quite some time, and not one of them got back to me.
What were you looking for? What were you jobbing?
What was I doing? I had all sorts of jobs. I worked in a printing factory, I worked for a solicitor, I worked for a surveyor. I like the outside jobs better, the outside ones, because if you were a messenger, you could just spend your day outside delivering things. Or my other really wonderful job for me one hot summer of 1969 was working for a surveyor and banging these nails into the road. And it was a very hot summer, so the tarmac was very soft. It was very easy work, actually, and one's responsibility ended with every nail. Dead easy. No qualification required.
Happy days, eh? Happy days.
Yes,
it was going to get more complicated later on. Fantastic.
Yeah, much tougher.
Were you immediately surrounded by music? And some of the music does come into your album as well, the stuff from radio, TV, films. We can hear that in the record.
Well, I was, surrounded by music. My dad was musical. He was able to play a number of instruments just for fun. He was a very, very bright guy. He had lots of different skills. He eventually became a professional artist at the same time that I became a professional musician. So around about 1970, we both went through this kind of sea change of, okay, you know, this is the real deal. He was selling paintings. alongside Bayswater Road, Hyde Park, and I was up and down the country with Genesis.
Oh wow! So your dad was out and about, because I've been past the portraits and
Those. I think it's
and the
still
big
there.
landscape paintings and things. Yeah.
Yeah, the Hyde Park Fair. I
They've
think
been there
called
for
it.
years and years. Fantastic. That's really good. Yeah, the creativity seeped down. But in the record, you do reference some of the things that you grew up with. There's certain theme tunes, TV theme tunes, and things. Would you like to fill us in on some of the influences?
Oh goodness me! I'm just thinking of stuff that came up. I was going to do much more of that, but luckily I was either talked out of it or run out of time. But what we had was there's a snippet from "Listen with Mother." Now, you're all too young to remember "Listen with Mother." It was "Watch with Mother" when television was invented. You know, once they invented the wheel. But it was different back in my day, and so the lady whose name, I'm sorry, escapes me, would say, "Are you sitting comfortably?"
And I'll begin.
And I'll begin. Okay, but you get that long, patronising pause. As kids were all supposed to load up, salute, sit down in the chair, behave properly, and instead of that, we have a baby's cry right at the beginning. The baby is obviously not comfortable, and the baby's cry turns into we extend the cry, and then it goes into a steam train and an incoming orchestra once it gets up to full speed, and then a rock band, strangely enough, with a guitarist, God knows why.
Who'd have thunk it that would happen? Roger King was instrumental in putting this together for you.
He was, yeah. He really ought to be here at the moment, but he's quite shy, shall we say. I can say that about him. He would disagree with me if I said it. No, he's a quiet man, but very, very accomplished, all sorts of skills. He was trained originally as a cathedral organist, never mind church organist, yeah. But then
which cathedral?
I don't know.
Oh.
He did, but then he took an engineering course and started heading into the world of recording. But he did music for at least a couple of major movies that you know about. That'd be Name of the Father and Cliffhanger and what have you with Stallone. So no slouch, this guy. Yeah, he did all that before he was chained to the keyboards with me for the past 30 odd years.
Enslaved by Steve.
Yes.
So who else is on the record?
Slavery.
Back with the usual team?
It got the usual suspects, the usual team, plus a couple of others. A lot of the album was made while we were on the road, actually recording when we had downtime at sound checks, because I was falling behind. There was a couple of tracks done, and I thought, well, when am I going to finish this album? There just isn't time at home. So we recorded, particularly drums, live in halls, and so people on the album. There's Craig Blundell, who does the majority of the drum work. There's also Nick DiVigilio, who kicks off the album. And some of you maybe remember Hugo Dagenhart, who's a fantastic drummer, who played with the Bootleg Beatles for years after he was working with me. So they're all brilliant.
What a line, and Amanda.
And there's more. And there's Amanda.
There's more.
Amanda Lehman, who sounds particularly good on this. There's Malik Mansurov on the tar. Again, no slouch. These people, they're really, really good. And the usual players: Rob Townsend, Jonas Reingold. There's a vocal from Nad Sylvan. Who have I left out? My brother, John. Sounds marvellous.
John.
Don't forget John. No, sounds brilliant. He's doing scat flute on one of the songs that's kind of all about Genesis, the track called Enter the Ring. And I'm sure there's more, but I'm not looking at an album sleeve, sorry.
Is your mum on it?
Is my mum on it? No! My mother's last performance was at Trading Boundaries, if anyone was there, and she got up and gave a speech. And
just impromptu?
Yeah, well, she was asked by Michael, who runs the place,
Wow,
Michael
okay.
Clifford. And yeah, in fact, one year when we did that with the trio, she got up and said, "I'd like to say a few words," and she gave a 20-minute virtuoso performance.
Oh wow! she's venturing into the world of after dinner speaking. This is her MO. She
Yeah.
could have been doing this.
It's on film.
This
Yes,
doing
she
that.
could. She could have been doing this. Yeah. In fact, I wish she'd been here. She would have loved this.
Oh, well, next time.
I'll
Next
tell
time.
her.
We'll get Steve's mum along as well.
Yes, yes,
Great
yeah.
stuff.
Credit where credit's due. Yeah. Yeah.
So the album's central figure is called Traveller, and that's you, basically. How did you create this character and why?
Well, because the idea of doing something autobiographical would take you so far, because you'd have reality and all those references. But beyond that, we wanted to do something that was more symbolic, so that Traveller could do certain things that I couldn't. As I say, I mentioned already the circus tent and it being swallowed by a whale, and what that might represent and everything. But so far that hasn't happened to me. So the idea of a third person.
How do you know where we are now?
I don't know.
Inside the HMV whale.
It's all a dream. That's right. There is no reality. It's just a succession of dreams.
Oh no, that's freaking me out. We started watching Life on Mars, and if anyone's watched that before, that's sort of like, what is going on? Is it in his brain, or has he gone on another plane? Oh my!
I'm sorry, by the way, that they haven't stretched the chairs for everybody. You're all having to stand. That's terrible at your age. But you know, I have to sit down because I'm probably older than you.
So the other characters that are in the record, some of them are figures from real life.
Yes, there's reference to someone who remains nameless, but when I was young, there was a guy at school, when we were about 9 years old. He had a problem with his leg, and I volunteered to push him around in a wheelchair, which was actually great fun because we listened to lots and lots of music. And he taught me how to play poker, how to smoke, how to steal, how to light fires, pyromania. Should I go on? And my mother said, yeah, he was a little bit like your first manager. He got me jobs, got me into trouble many, many times, but University of Crime, etc. So at 9 years old, I mean, this guy could not only play brilliant poker, he could cheat at it, he could shuffle the cards like a professional. So I imagine if he's still alive, he's probably running a South American country, or he's in prison. He's got to still be there, one of these great survivors. But he had no conscience whatsoever. But he had, many. He had street smarts. You know what I mean? It was that kind of thing, a kind of artful dodger.
I was
character.
just thinking about Oliver and the
offense.
Artful Dodger.
No offence to Phil Collins, artful Dodger type. Yeah, I think I was Oliver Twist to his Dodger. Yes.
And who else appears, maybe even in metaphor?
I'm trying to think now. I don't know. I haven't got an album sleeve with me, and getting older, my memory's going like crazy. Sorry, what did you say your name was? Okay, Joe.
You mentioned maybe a theme of reflecting on Genesis.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. There's Genesis. There's a track called Into the Ring, which is basically about just before Genesis and then joining Genesis, and then the next track, which is Get Me Out, was the joys of Genesis. It started to pour once I couldn't function with a parallel solo career as I needed to do. So I left. Other people that are mentioned in the album, not necessarily by name, but my wife Jo, and there are various love songs dedicated to her. She's done quite a lot of the lyrics as well. I mean, these things are born out of conversations, but if it's a song dedicated to her, then I feel I've got license to say what I absolutely feel. And what I owe her, and many things. Because I mean, if I've got a career today, it's because I went through a kind of a rebirth thanks to her. She puts in so much effort. It's unbelievable. But I often wish she would rest a bit because she works so hard. Anyway,
it's interesting you're saying this from the stage when she's over there. Jo, are you listening? Can we have a round of applause for Jo, by the way?
I have to say, Jo works much harder than I do. I just, I come up, I swan around and just come up with the music. But she suggests some of the tunes as well. And sings top lines to things, and there's some really good ones. I really memorable.
You mentioned actually at least one of the songs came to you in a dream, didn't it?
That's. I was in New Orleans many years ago, which is a fantastic place to visit, particularly at that time. I was touring there. I was just doing a tour of. They had this book chain called Borders Bookstores, and the idea was you turn up much like this, sign a few things, play a bit, and then blah, 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 and move on. Okay, so we started off in New Orleans, all very nice, and we saw this thing. Oh, swamp tours. Yes, okay, you could go out on a raft on the swamps. Trouble was there was a storm, and as a result, I swallowed quite a lot of unwittingly swamp water. I don't know if anyone's been through this experience, but I have to say it was agonizing, and I was very sick and feverish and God knows what. And this went on for about 2 weeks, feeling like there's the alien in my stomach and it wants to get out. And I fell asleep. I just met Ian MacDonald in New York, the late great Ian MacDonald, friend of mine, great encourager of me, and so sad that he's passed. But he said to me, you should have some Jewish penicillin, some chicken soup. And he was absolutely right. Sorry about the vegetarians and vegans, but I had the chicken soup and went to sleep that night. And even in my sleep, I was still in pain. I was dreaming and I was still in pain. And then I had this wonderful celestial woman's kind of operatic goddess-like voice. And it was singing a melody. And I remembered it and wrote it down the moment I woke up. And it was like, listening to this voice in the dream, it was as if the pain went and it was evaporating like clouds just going like this. And I thought, this is a healing piece of music. I should do it one day. So many years later, I talked Amanda Lehman into singing it. We found the right key for her voice, flooded it in effect, and we got very much the same things, very shimmery, kind of operatic sounding, but it kicks off probably the first love song on the album, and I can't remember the name of the song. It's called Ghost Moon and Living Love, which is the title that Joe and I came up with when we were in Greece looking up at the moon one day, when the moon appears and it's broad daylight, but it looks like a ghost of a moon. It's very white. And anyway, we were talking about things in a lovely place called Napoleon, and that's, some of the history of that song. It was a nice title, and it goes into harmonies later on. And the other thing I was thinking about it was, I was trying to listen to the album the other day, and I was exhausted from doing so many interviews. I was listening to it, and I woke up. Thank you, Sharon, that's my publicist. He's been wearing me out wonderfully.
Doing her job.
And I was listening to this, and I fell asleep, and I woke up just at the end of Ghost Moon and Living Love. And I thought, what am I listening to? Is that the Beatles? Or is it George Harrison or something? And I realised, it's one of yours, mate. I had these moments, these condor moments. And it's always nice when it happens, when you think you're hearing something good and you didn't realise it was yourself, first of all. It was you. If any other musos have had that experience, then, be nice to know about it. Jacko Jacksix here. Hi, Jacko.
Jacko's here.
I'm sure he's had that experience. Hi, Jacko.
Well, I've never heard anything I've done that I thought was any good.
He's never heard anything that he's ever done that was any good. He's overly modest. He's a very talented man and a wonderful singer and guitarist.
Okay, so you mentioned that there's love songs on here. The record is very much about love, and which is appropriate for Valentine's week and your birthday week. So, just to reflect on that, to actually be able to put this into a concept too. Really strange and exciting and, impressive, I think.
Well, yeah, I think it's funny. I think ever since Supper's Ready with Genesis, and I was the one who suggested that we did a long form piece of music, perfect length for a hit single, 22 minutes long. But I thought, well, actually that worked. People liked the journey, and again, Joe said to me, I think people would like a story, a concept, a narrative, and I'd already done the book, some years ago. We finished it off in lockdown. I think of this as a kind of companion piece. I mean, it doesn't tell the story in exactly the same way, but it's kind of flashpoints in the course of a life, things that shaped a life and would divert the course of that river, or all those choices that you make. You know, one minute you join a great band, and then the next you think, I've had enough of this, I need to go. But it was great doing the album, and I wanted to join it all up, segue it all, to try and make it into one song. I think the songs work individually, he said immodestly, but so I hope I can take them out of context and perform them individually from time to time, because the prospect of doing the whole thing with the whole circus and the whale and you know, the lights, the lasers, dancing girls in the wings, the elephants, the whales,
the props, the greatest show on earth kind of
yes,
thing.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yes, can you
Getting
do all
Battersea
of that?
Station in, getting
Yes.
it away again.
Can you do it as a busker? You know, can you strap that drum to your back and pull it off? No, is the answer. So, but I kind of think that, you know, it was a little bit like John Lennon said some very nice things about Genesis many years ago, and I only got to hear about them about 2 years ago, when he said he thought that Genesis were true sons of the Beatles. So if there's any influence, the overriding influences, especially with the beginning of the album, it was all that wonderful Beatles work which managed to mainstream places as far-flung as India. So I think, you know, music shaped the world at that time, and music became more inclusive. The world started talking to itself instead of blowing itself to bits as we've got today, which pisses me off greatly. Did anyone else get pissed off about that? Yeah. Right, okay.
Yeah.
So, what are we going to do about it?
Yeah,
Write protest songs, right? Every one of you, thank you.
that's the next album.
Send it to the Prime Minister and all the rest, yeah.
That's the next album. Well, the sound of the record is incredible and it's mighty, and in fact you mentioned that you wanted to create something that was a force and overwhelming to the listener, and it was noted by Mike Barnes from Prog and Mojo and Record Collector magazines in the house. It was
Hi,
noted by Mike in one of many fantastic reviews that it is some of the most flamboyant and dazzling guitar playing of your career. So tell us about some of the inspirations for the guitar.
My mum wrote that review, really, honestly, Mike. Seriously. Well, to be honest, I was lucky enough to grow up in a time when both the Beatles and Segovia were around at the same time, and I saw Jimi Hendrix live a couple of times. It was a great time to be young in the 1960s. There were brilliant guitarists on every street corner, it seemed, and John Mayall, who's now officially retired, but I saw lots of gigs with him, and Peter Green. I saw Eric Clapton when he was still very young with Cream when they were first formed. And
Is this you going with the ferryman over to Eel Pie Island in the mist?
Eel Pie, that was really a great place to go, and the late great Paul Butterfield and Mike Bloomfield, who did lots of stuff with I think they were the guys who turned Dylan electric. Excuse throat. Lots of interviews, but it was a lovely time to grow up, because there was, you know, it was so rich. And then I heard classical stuff. Segovia plays Bach when I was 15, which you might know already. But even today, I was watching a video of him playing, thinking, oh, God, the colours are unbelievable. All that, the dexterity, the grace of it. I can't think of enough words. It's a whole world of you've just got to do it forever to get it anywhere near that.
And the modern guitarist, because I think one of them was, well, I say modern, actually one of your contemporaries, but carried on going until sadly they passed away last year, Jeff Beck.
Oh yeah, well, as I was recording some of the guitar for this, particularly with the opening track, which was one of the last to be done, I couldn't help but think about Jeff, who was a leading light, not just for me, but for so many guitarists I work with. You know, but I worked briefly with Brian May on a couple of projects, and he brought in his record collection. It was the same as mine. He was playing the same tracks to me. You know, it was the Nazar Blue by the Yardbirds with Jeff's incredible playing on it. It was Key to Love, John Mayall with Eric Clapton, and both, you know, blazing, wonderful solos. And I also worked with, and so sorry to keep name dropping, but Steve Howe, and we were doing stuff, and we were all agreeing that Jeff Beck really was the boy. So if I wasn't channeling him, I was trying to, you know, add a footnote, do you know what I mean, to the wonderful noises that he brought to us.
Yeah, worthwhile too. He was amazing, and of course you never shy away from metal, so that's also in the record, and that makes it even more contemporary, exciting, pushing it forward. So yeah, congratulations on that. I just want to wrap up with this before we get some questions on the floor. To say, you said, I love this album. It says the things I've been wanting to say for a very long time. So you finally got that out there.
Yeah, sometimes that's when you say saying, but I'm thinking of the guitar as a voice as well. So being able to make the guitar do certain things that it ought to have done for years, and I think it's come off on this. Yeah.
Fantastic. Right, shall we have some audience questions then? Oh, thank you. Thanks very much. That's that little Q&A then finished. So yeah, we'd like some audience questions, and okay, who'd like to? Sorry. Oh, thank you very much. You're going to get to speak into a mic.
Oh, you get a mic. That's great.
Yeah.
This is professional, this, isn't it?
Yes, it certainly is.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi there.
My question is, if you could collaborate with any artist who you haven't had the chance to collaborate with yet, who would it be and why?
Oh, well, it's a funny thing, but I tell you what, I think, you know, Paul Butterfield is no longer living, but I still have dreams about him, who I suspect didn't realise what a genius he was, harmonica playing genius. And harmonica was my first instrument, but when I first saw him live, he completely reinvented the instrument, and I had no idea what he was doing. I was just completely floored. So I would love to play guitar with the late, great Paul Butterfield.
Fantastic.
Thank you for that. Do check out the Butterfield Blues Band. There's a couple of really good. East Meets West is a great one, isn't it?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes, East West is a brilliant album. The first album is a brilliant album, and another album I think is brilliant is In My Own Dream, which is later, but he sounds wonderful as a singer, and there's stuff on it that almost sounds like Tears for Fears, you know, Woman in Chains. It preempts that with the addition of each instrument at a time. It's a great sort of crescendo and wonderful sax playing by David Sanborn.
Who's next?
I've got the mic anyway. You've talked about being able to perform individual tracks, but does that mean you haven't actually thought about doing it in any of your upcoming shows, or can we hope to see it?
Well, at the moment, there was the idea of maybe doing 2 or 3 tracks from it. It's been a long-held tradition of the idea of not actually forcing everyone to listen to the new album, because it might not be everyone's cup of tea when there's so much, you know, rich heritage of favourites. So it's a difficult trade-off. But I thought to myself, well, yeah, I could attempt the whole thing, but I've got to twist the arm of every member of the band in order to do that. And you know, maybe if it really was a huge success, I'd have no options. So you know, that's and I have to say that I've never had the level of attention already with this album before it's even been released officially today, of course. But it does seem like, you know, if anything's going to do it, it's going to be this album. So it would be a challenge to do the whole of it live, but never say never. Meanwhile, snippets, I like to think that it'll work, you know, in Cameo.
So, have you rehearsed anything yet, or is that still for the future?
Have I? Sorry.
Have you got any of these tracks in your current repertoire, as it were?
No. We haven't been playing any of this stuff live yet. No, but some of the things were recorded from live gigs in the halls that we were operating in after we'd done sound checks. So, but no, haven't attempted it live yet. No.
Okay. Anyone else? Who's next? Do you want to say your name as well?
It's Gaza Gary.
Hi.
Hi, my question is, back in the old days of the Red Line, Leytonstone and the Wake Arms Epping, when you played with Genesis, you played for about 70 minutes. Now you're on stage for nearly 3 hours.
Yes.
Could we expect a longer set on this tour? Another maybe 3.5 hours? I think we deserve it.
A couple of days.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, back in the day, it probably wasn't a seated audience, although people used to just sit on the floor in those days. Chairs hadn't been invented, you understand. But, yeah, sets were shorter in those days, weren't they? And but then there weren't so many albums to draw from. And but there is a break in the middle, usually, with shows these days, because, you know, nobody's as young as they used to be, of course. And we all need breaks.
Need a cup of tea and a
Cup of tea.
Yeah, comfort break, basically.
Yes, comfort break, indeed.
And a quick second question, is Amanda going to be joining you on the whole tour?
She says she will join on the whole tour in the UK. She says that now. Okay, so I'm hoping she will.
I wish you'd remind it, because
Yes.
lovely singer.
Okay, yeah, she is lovely. She sounds
Absolutely
great.
agree. We love Amanda, don't we?
Yeah.
Oh, and also guitar. For her guitar.
Yes, oh yes,
Superb.
yes, there's that as well, yes.
Yeah, she does that too. She does it
She
all.
does, she does, she does.
There's something very operatic on this.
And
as
she's
well,
blonde
isn't
and
she?
younger and more female than me.
What's not to like? Okay, next question, please.
I expect that. I'm sorry, it's Rose.
Hello, Rose.
I expect you get asked this all the time, but sort of when was the earliest time that you kind of got to play a guitar? Like, was it your dad that got you into it? And how did you develop this really unique sound that you've got? I mean, it's anyone that hears anything knows exactly that that's you playing. It's a complete, distinct sound. So I just wondered, kind of, when you kind of got into guitar playing and how you developed that.
You sound. Are you a guitarist yourself? Do you play?
I was.
Oh, okay. Well, my dad was, you know, first musical influence. He gave me a harmonica when I was very young. So that started when I was 2, and then down the mines very early, you see. And then when I was about 12, I started getting interested in guitar. I was buying guitar records, but he had this very big sort of F cello hole guitar. I think it was a Canadian thing, country style stuff, you know, like ones that you saw Elvis playing. Yeah? And I was just about big enough to get my arms around it by the time I was 12. By the time I was 14, he was showing me chords on it. And so, you know, it's not everyone's dad who helps out in that way, but what a brilliant introduction that was.
I mean, it's so distinct, you sound.
Yeah, well, I think of mine as, you know, it's a mongrel made up of a number of other people's sounds. I mean, Joe mentioned Jeff Beck earlier, and that was really the first time I was aware of the distortion, fuzzbox, echo, reverb, all of those things, and a lot of people attribute that sort of sound to me, but I know it was him, because it was well before me, and even now I'll come upon a sound and I'll go, so yeah, that's pure Jeff.
You do like your pedals though, don't you?
I do like pedals, yeah. I think something that happened over time was that more and more pedals were developed, and so it meant that you could get more and more distortion at lower levels, so you didn't have to kill anyone with volume. And the Fernandez guitars that I've got these days, they've got sustain on board the guitars, so feedback. It's possible at a very, very low level. You can hold a conversation over the top while I'm recording a lot of this stuff with guitar. They're strange beasts. Jack and I were having a conversation about what he was using when he was working with Lenny Henry. It sounded like a great sound to me.
For a bluesy kind of guitar.
Yeah, a bluesy thing, yeah, wonderful overdriven stuff. So I would favour a kind of a brassy overdrive, so you get the feeling it's, oh yeah, it's a little bit of a trumpet in there, and of course harmonicas can be very exciting too when they're overdriven as well. It's kind of the poor man's trumpet, but it's also, there's the guitar in there as well, and some people think that they're hearing harmonica and they assume it's guitar. It's quite a strange thing.
Hi, Steve. I recently read a biography of Tony Stratton Smith, founder of Charisma Records, of course, and I knew he was a character. I didn't realise how much of a character until I read the book, and I was wondering if you had any memories you could share of what it was like working for Charisma Records at that time for Tony Stratton Smith, and what the relationship was like with the other bands on the label.
Well, in my young day, I used to do a lot of drinking, and so did he. Charisma Records were just above the old marquee in Wardour Street when it was based there. I'm sure some of you remember that.
Yeah.
And so just about every other night, if not every night, I'd go by the record company if we weren't touring. And into the ship, yeah, that's it, you got it. The ship, the chasse, La Chasse, and the Speakeasy. Those were the watering holes. I knew that he was brilliant, and I wanted to learn from him. So I had lots of conversations with him where I would do most of the listening, and he would do most of the talking. And he was a fascinating character. He just seemed to combine a lot of things. He'd been a journalist, an author. He owned race horses, rock groups. He was never married. He was gay. He was quite open about that. But he was a lovely guy, and he was a visionary. And I often used to think, why does he go investing in albums that are plainly not going to make it? But he did. If he wanted to sign up Sir John Benjamin reciting his poems, he did that. And you get a bit of Ronnie Lang, the psychiatrist, shaker and mover of the 60s, stuff I read and was fascinated by. But you think it would hardly be the stuff of hit albums. Why would he do that? But at the same time, of course, he managed The Nice. He managed Bonzo Dog Doodah Band as forerunners of Monty Python. He invested in Monty Python film stuff, Holy Grail, I believe. And so I think, money for him was a bit sort of easy come, easy go. I've lost it on these guys, but I've won it back on this big time. So he was almost like sort of Dickensian character in that way. I think he's a bit of a Mr. Micawber in that sense. And he's a brilliant guy, and I loved him to bits. Unfortunately, we sort of fell out at one point, and when I was no longer on the label after I ironically had a hit single, but he and I hooked up when there was the get-together at Milton Keynes with Genesis in 1982. If anyone was there and got soaking wet, got wet. Sorry about that. But right at the end of it all, after we'd gotten thoroughly hammered backstage, everybody, and it was a really lovely moment of everyone together again, I saw this lonely figure standing by one of the tea stands, with a hat and an umbrella. And I said, "Oh, Tony, there you are." And we started to sort of reminisce a bit. And we were old pals again, and we were both trying to work out when the magic really kicked in on that show. And we both thought it was when Peter Gabriel came in with the words on his own, the a cappella intro to Dancing with the Moon at Night. Can you tell me where my country lies? And suddenly it happened, that feeling of, oh my God.
It's like a clarion call, isn't it?
Well, it is. It's like, who are you? All that. So it was lovely to have that moment with him. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, Steve. Bruce.
Hi, Bruce.
Great gig at Trading Boundaries, by the way. You talked in the past about when you left Genesis, how the tap was turned on and you couldn't stop it. Has that tap been on continuously for 30 years? Or did you ever get writer's block? And also, when it comes to new material, do you focus on, it's a rock album or it's an acoustic, or does it just come haphazardly? And the final question, sorry, how much input does the band give from your concept to the final product?
Well, can I answer in a roundabout way?
That was a bit of a prog question. Multi-partite, a double gatefold, yeah.
A double gatefold question, absolutely. Yeah, I can't teach anyone how to write a tune. I don't know how it happens. It just seems to happen by picking up a guitar and some days just doing the equivalent of scales, going around the old moves, boring yourself to death. And if you keep going long enough, something new starts to crop up. And what I find is I write it down as soon as something happens that's new. And it comes along at the worst possible times, new ideas. Just as I was thinking I was going to be late for this today, had a guitar in hand and I did something, I thought, oh, that sounds quite good. I'll write that down. So if it works on the page, which is very cold, it's not sexy, it's just got to work, it's got to be musical on the page, the old-fashioned, old-school way of doing it. And I know that you asked this multifaceted question, so...
Yeah, it was the input of the band as well, shaping.
Input of the band, that's right. So that's
I think that was
important.
the second bit, wasn't it, Bruce?
Well, the band includes. I'll get to the other bit. Then the band includes my wife Jo writing together with me, Roger King for the writing, and then once there's a computer sketch, we add humans down the line, and we can extend bits if somebody comes up with a brilliant idea or a brilliant solo. Once the blueprint is in place, then digital recording, of course, makes it a flexible process. Sorry to give you such a boring but detailed answer.
What was it? What else did you say, Bruce?
Was when does new material come haphazardly, or do you focus on an acoustic album or a rock album? How does that?
Yeah, I think that conversations I have with my wife Jo these days, very often, sometimes I'll be thinking of something, it'll turn into a song, but other times I'll be thinking, oh, I don't really know what the next album should be. So for instance, in lockdown, I said, you know, it's terrible the fact that I'm supposed to be doing all these gigs and they're being postponed, we don't know for how long, and I wanted to stay in touch with people, and I thought there's no more personal way of staying in touch than the idea of doing an acoustic album. So Jo said to me, yeah, acoustic album sounds like a good idea, but I know what you'll do. You'll probably get overly influenced by Baroque music and all your sort of hero worship of Segovia, but why don't you do the following? And she came up with a brilliant idea. She said, why don't you do an idea that's based on all these countries around the Mediterranean and try and make each piece of music reflective of those different countries. So if you do something Spanish, well, you know it's going to sound Spanish. If you do something that's Greek, you can do certain things to bring out that. And she actually came up with the Greek melody that kicks it off. And ironically, Greek ended up sounding very much like Grieg at one point after Roger King had been working on it, putting harmonies to her top line. And then I thought to myself, we used to go to a place called Carluccio's. There used to be loads of those restaurants, and there's still one left in Richmond. And I believe Carluccio wrote a book called Under a Mediterranean Sky. And I'm afraid that's where I took the title from. I thought if I applied that to a very unoriginal idea, but I thought that it was the perfect title for, just like, you know, A Midsummer Night's Dream, and I think someone else did that before I did. So sometimes titles are original, like The Circus and the Night Whale, which again was Joe's title. But that's how that acoustic thing took shape, and it was the perfect thing in a way for, you know, not delegating, because we knew we couldn't work with other people at that time. You remember everyone was banned from getting together with, you know, you couldn't say hello to your cat, could you? Because you might infect each other. So I was working with the nylon a lot there. Did you ask me about electric and how it comes about? I can't tell you, as I say, I don't know where ideas come from. I think they come out of boredom, being bored with going over the same moves that might be proficient but aren't breaking any new ground. So eventually, sometimes when you put the instrument down, having been working on it for some time, the idea that you really should have been doing starts to present itself. Something, the wheels start, the cogs start going somehow. And again, go back to the instrument or write it down or both, if that helps.
Yeah, great stuff. We've actually got to wrap up, everybody. I'm so sorry, but that's because. Oh, one more. Yes, we've got someone over there.
Who's that?
Oh, thank you. All right. Yeah.
Just under the wire.
Who we got?
Andy, I'll just squeeze this one in.
Andy, yeah.
As someone who's been watching you since 1978, I was at the Hammersmith concerts way back then.
All right.
If anybody remembers. You're talking about the massive material you've got in 3-hour concerts, I think somebody mentioned.
Yeah.
Watching you perform, it all seems to come so naturally and just sort of flood out of your fingers, as it were. How does that work for you as a performer on stage, as a person who doesn't play a guitar? How does that work? How do you remember it all?
Well, I think people probably forget. People assume, oh, it's easy. But there are times when I've been on stage when I've been absolutely terrified that I'm going to forget something, and sometimes I do. And it's a strange thing, isn't it? You know, I've often thought, you know, portrait painters like my dad, you'd never think of painting that painting in front of everybody, unless you were Bob Ross, who does that wonderfully on TV with those shows, you know, The Joy of Painting. But for some reason, musicians...
That's another title to Nick for another album.
Was that The Joy of
Painting? The Joy of Painting, yeah.
Yes, The Joy of Painting. And, but it's a funny thing. Sometimes it's a knife edge. I used to be terrified. The early days of Genesis, and I know Jacko said he was there for those lots of those Genesis gigs before I'd even recorded with the band back in 1971. But in those days, I would be on stage. You know, I'd only really been playing at home up to then, and we were playing in front of people, and sometimes my knees would be knocking together like this, and my volume pedal would be giving a permanent vibrato because I'm absolutely bloody terrified that I'm going to get it wrong.
And you were asking about how Steve got his sound.
Yeah, that's it. That's how I got sound by default. How did you get that vibrato? So, but over time, I learned to relax more, and it was Phil Collins who said to me, "You should learn to enjoy your work more." And then the penny dropped, and I did, and it became much easier when I thought of it as a celebration rather than a test. You know, a test in front of the Russian ice skating judges giving you very low marks. You know, I've always imagined that. Maybe it's, you know, a product of this sort of education that we go through as the Brits, all being told, yes, you're no good, you're never going to amount to anything, you're a grammar school failure if you don't leave with 5 O-levels and all the rest, you'll never get anywhere. John Hurt, the actor, his headmaster saying to him, "You're going to be an actor, you'll never be any good." And you could see that he was pained when he was talking about that, John Hurt, and he said, "You wonder where they get some of these characters." Well, they get them from England, except that our headmaster was from New Zealand, and he'd been a Japanese prisoner of war, which is possibly why he was completely unhinged. New Zealand first, of course. No, I'm kidding.
So there we go. Anyway, thank you so much for your questions. We're going to have to wrap up so that we can get some signing done. But thank you so much to everybody for turning up today.
Thank you.
And thank you so much to Steve. And HMV, everybody at HMV, thank you. Thank you, guys. It's lovely to see you. Thanks for spending Friday night with us.
Yeah, you could be out there drinking instead of that. You're wasting time here, but thank you.
That'll be later. That'll be afterwards. All over to the ship after this. Okay. Take care, everybody. See you later. Cheers.